All right, Nico, can you say, welcome to another episode of Healthy Births, Happy Babies?
It's a happy episode. Happy babies.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of Healthy Births, Happy Babies. I'm Dr. Jay Warren. I'm a prenatal and pediatric chiropractor here in San Diego, but I'm obviously the host of this podcast. And on today's episode, my guest is Dr. Stephanie Dueger. And she and I have known each other for a number of years. We worked on a project together a couple of years ago. And at the end of that project, she shared with me this book that she's been working on. And I just love it. The title of it is Preparing for Parenthood, 55 Essential Conversations for Couples Becoming Families. And at the time that we're recording this, she's knocking on the door of it being published and it being available. By the time you're listening to this, most likely the book is available. And I think it's made a really big difference with the dads that I've shared it with. I've incorporated some of what she's shared within her book, with her permission, into my new dad's class, which is now available for fathers and helping with their transition to fatherhood. And in the dads groups that I lead, oftentimes the subjects that she talks about in her book are ones that are causing challenges for new parents. And I really think this book is really important, and the conversations within it are really important for a mom and a dad to have before they enter parenthood. But if they are in parenthood, to be able to have ways of talking, and she talks about those kind of strategies to be able to communicate really effectively and calmly, but then also giving you the prompts of different subjects to talk about, whether it's if you're still pregnant, about pregnancy and birth choices, but then also postpartum and starting a family, about what the duties are and the roles and who's taking care of this and who's going back to work when, and how to navigate all of that before you're in it is so valuable. But if you are already parents, all of the work that is involved in this can be really helpful as well. And the parents that I work with, either in my practice or with the dads group, they are most of the time already parents, and they've gotten a lot of value out of what she's going to share with it. So again, this book will be available soon. I'll have the links to her website if what we talk about with her shortly inspires you to go get her book. I highly encourage it. So with no further ado, let me switch over to my conversation with Dr. Dueger, and we'll jump right in. Dr. Dueger, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for joining me today. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thanks. Thanks for having me.
Good. Well, we've had many conversations, I would say, over the last while about your work. This is the first time we get to talk about it on the podcast. And the reason why I'm bringing you on is because I just love your work. I love your I love your book. You passed it on to me a while ago, and you are knocking on the door of it being fully published. So congratulations in advance for that. I know it's been a while.
It has been a while. It's been, like I was saying earlier, a bit of a protracted birth, a long birth.
Yes.
Thanks to COVID, but I'm really excited to get this out.
Yeah, it's the title of your book is Preparing for Parenthood, 55 Essential Conversations for Couples Becoming Families. And I have, since I got an advanced copy of it to look through, maybe it was a year ago, it was before, certainly I was doing more work with the dads. I've recommended it with your permission to all the dads, because these conversations are ones, and the topics that you cover that we're going to explore today in this episode, like couples really need to talk about this stuff before they become parents. And it's when I read through it last year, those conversations are ones I'm hearing all the time, that the new moms that I take care of, as well as the new dads that I work with, are having a lot of challenges with it. Like, gosh, we should have talked about this before, and it's causing crisis. So before we go into those kind of topics and stuff there, like, how did you come about to be writing this book? Like, obviously you're a therapist and you've done work with couples before, but like, what prompted the need to get this down into a book?
Great question. So I became a parent 13 years ago
Okay.
for the first time, and again 8 years ago. And what I found the first time I became a parent was I thought I had it dialed. So I went into parenthood having read every book out there, having worked with families and kids my entire life. And I was like, yeah, this is going to be a piece of cake. And my husband and I are both therapists, as you said. So we thought we were pretty set. And it was so humbling to walk through that door of becoming a parent and realize that all the advice that I've been so eagerly giving to these new parents about what they should be doing was based on theory instead of experience. And my husband and I both figured out that there were many conversations that we wished we had had prior to having our first baby, before we were sleep deprived and a little grouchy and really just really needing to talk through some things that were challenging. And despite having had many of the conversations that I listed in the book, we found ourselves in kind of hot water a bunch of times. And I thought, I wonder if it would be helpful for people to just have these conversations and kind of know what's coming down the pike. Because I think a lot of people go into parenthood and there's the baby shower and all the cute clothes and the fun, and it's going to be amazing. And it's kind of like the secret club that you come into. And it can be a little shocking sometimes for people to come in. Even if you have a beautiful experience becoming a parent, you still run into some issues that can be challenging.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and that's definitely something that we talk about a lot about. One, I wish I knew, right? And you're answering those kind of questions, but also so much preparation, especially for first-time parents, is for pregnancy, birth, and that's it. maybe newborn care, like if you haven't changed diapers, and hopefully breastfeeding. But then as far as the couple is concerned, like entering into parenthood and like, how do we want to parent? And, all these conversations talking about like duties and roles and going back to work and relationship and sex and intimacy, all those kind of things are things that maybe if they even thought that's something we need to figure out, which I would imagine most couples don't even, but that's not even on their radar, think, okay, we'll figure that out later on. And as you said, in a sleep deprived state, in a healing state, because mom's going through postpartum recovery from the birth and from pregnancy, is just, and especially those kind of big topics are hard to have calmly, rationally, effectively when you're in a stress state. So I love that you give these prompts to go through the conversations. And I'd love to talk about some of the big ones, but you start off with some really sound communication 101, you call it, about how to, give information and get information. So can you go over for our listeners, like your advice on that?
Sure. So I called it Communication 101, but it's really a process that a lot of therapists use. And I put this in because it slows down the process of communication. So often, under stress especially, we're trying to get our point across. And what we really want is to feel heard and seen. And often when the conflict is high, when the emotions are high, the other person's just trying to jump in and get their side of the story heard. So in slowing the process down, it really is sitting down, just listening. So one person is talking, the other person is listening and reflecting what they hear, right? Yeah. So it's, I heard you say X. Is that correct? Is that what you said? Well, yes, but I also, did you get the tone? I'm really angry about this. Oh, I hear that you're angry. Yeah. Right. And really slowing it down rather than the other person going into defensive mode, which is often what happens under conflict. So it goes into, well, I wouldn't have done that if you didn't. Well, you said that and that set me off. Right. So it's really scaling it back. So I invite people reading the book and clients to practice using it with simple things, right? So if you and your partner have a challenge around whose turn it is to walk the dog, say, and it's not a huge challenge, but maybe it's a snowy night or whatever, they don't want to go out. They slow it all the way down. Like I was upset that you didn't want to take the dog out for a walk because there was a snowstorm and I had to do it, right? And then the person just reflects that information back, and then you reflect it back until the original person speaking feels heard. And when you do that, what happens is the person who is sharing, their nervous system settles, right? And they're like, oh, you hear me, you understand what I'm saying. You may not agree with it, but you hear me, right? And then the other person gets to go.
Yeah.
So it really does slow down the process enough that you can actually hear each other instead of kind of blowing up quickly.
Right. And I like your the wording that you do of, kind of filling in the blanks of when you said this or when you did this, I felt this, right? So instead of accusing a person for being wrong for doing or saying something, it's just merely sharing like how you felt about it. And at least in my experience in life, like you can't really argue with a person around how they feel about how something happened. I mean, you can, of course, it's not very healthy or honoring of that person, but it's like, this is how I felt. I'm like, oh, I did not mean it to come across that way. And then it can be worked through in that way, but then also in that reflecting, is that what you call it? Reflecting kind of, this is what I heard. Am I right? And then it gives them opportunity to tell them, yes, it's right, but there's more.
Right. And part of that you were speaking to is all about owning your own experience, right? It's using I statements like I feel rather than you did this and made me mad.
Right.
Right. So it's really like I'm feeling angry. And I was triggered because this happened. Right. It's really owning that experience so that you're not placing blame.
Yeah. That's so important. And your advice of doing this with like simple things at first and doing, I mean, obviously this book is geared towards before babies arrived and it's different afterwards, but to do it when there isn't as much charge on these things that can come up where it might be, has escalated so much that it takes a lot of work to get back down to a grounded space. But if you're starting in this way, it builds a foundation for you to get to that place, even if it is escalating. Is that what you found with your clients?
Exactly. Yeah. And honestly, arguing becomes a lot harder when you've got an itty bitty human in your arms, right? Yeah. So the hormones are rushing through postpartum, and there's obviously sleep deprivation usually. And often there's a sense of, wanting to protect the baby. Like, I don't want to argue. We have a little baby here, which makes sense, right? Baby is affected. So practicing this beforehand and becoming comfortable with how are we going to navigate conflict when it arises, and how will we do it as gracefully as possible so that we are saying what needs to be said. We're not holding it back, but we're also not impacting not just each of us, but also our whole family system.
Right. Because I've seen probably just as much, like working more specifically with the dads now, there's just as many dads that will engage and try to defend and it escalates. Just as many are doing the exact opposite. They'll retreat. They're like, okay, whatever you say, like, fine. And kind of, it doesn't work through the issue. It just brushes it under the rug because there's too much going on. And he's like, I'm not going to win anyway. So what's the point? But that basis, that foundation can really be, I mean, just basics of a couple being together, let alone like it being launching into parenthood.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. So I think what you're speaking to is the importance of, again, feeling heard and seen. And so when we don't work through those issues, what ends up happening is it's the grain of sand in your shoe that turns into the raging blister. And then all of a sudden you're blowing up at your partner about burning the spaghetti, right? When it has nothing to do with that. It's the 7 or 8 times I didn't mention that I was angry about something else.
Right.
right? So it builds up. So it's really a practice of doing it on a regular basis.
Right. And in your book, like, you have like not just that simple description, but ways of creating space in the day, after a moment, a tone to be able to like come together to work things out or to start working on those. So those are great tools for a couple to have. And then we can now like dive into the conversations, you know, that we all wish we had, but now you have these these conversations. We're not obviously going to go into all 55, but what have you found in your experience to be like some of the really big ones that if they didn't get through all 55, like essentially like make sure you have these, which are the big ones?
Yeah. So some of the big ones are about roles.
Mm-hmm.
So that tends to be one of the hardest challenges that people don't anticipate. So we all kind of go into this experience of parenthood of expectations. This is what you are going to do as a parent, and this is what my role is going to be as a parent. And normally we don't talk about roles in general. We kind of fall into whatever our pattern is. So maybe one person enjoys cooking more and the other person is fine doing cleaning stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And it just kind of naturally evolves often. When there's a baby who comes into the family, everything gets blown up, right? So especially right after the birth, the expectations need to be really clear about, hey, mom is going to be, resting, focusing on nursing, whatever it is that needs to happen. And the partner is going to be doing what? What does the partner's role look like? And what is that going to look like 4 weeks after the birth? How about 8 weeks after the birth? Right? So say the birth mom is staying home for maybe 3 months or something, isn't going back to work. Does the partner who's going out to work expect the birth mom to also be cleaning the house, making meals, mowing the lawn, whatever else needs to happen? Is there an expectation around that? And has it been talked about? Because one of the funny experiences that I know a lot of people have had this experience, but my husband and I also experienced this. I had been working full time up until having our first baby. And about 6 weeks post birth, when kind of our help had dissipated, he was still working, full time, and would come home and the house would be in shambles. I wouldn't have showered. I mean, I was just focused on baby, mm-hmm. right? And a kind of off the cuff comment comes out of his mouth like, well, what do you do all day? Uh-huh. And just right. Like that lack of awareness. And I know, like, it's funny because so many people have that experience, right? Absolutely. And I hear it all the time right. from clients. And my instant reaction was rage of just yep. like, are you kidding? You have no idea how hard this is. Yeah. And he didn't, to be fair, he had no idea, but right. we had never talked about that. And we didn't even know to talk about it. So I think roles is that those are conversations that you really want to have right. prior, like, hey, let's set our expectations low. Let's get support where we can. Let's, it's okay to let the laundry pile up for a while. Mm-hmm. You kind of set your expectations in a different way.
Right. And having, like, say, like with the laundry piling up, like the question is it okay for the laundry to pile up for a little while? Like it should be, but a certain person in the relationship might not feel okay with that. Right.
Exactly.
Like the partner might feel like it's fine. Like we'll get to it. There's so many other things going on. But mom might be like really unsettled by that. And that could be something as far as an act that the partner can do that will settle and have her feel taken care of as well as more comfortable, because that's a trigger for her. That's just one example, right?
Right.
But I like how you have in your book like a kind of a checklist of all these different things so they can be talked about. And I know for the partner, a lot of times just knowing like this is what I need to do, I'll do it. It can be good of like, oh, for 8 weeks, this is what I do. And then there isn't any of that, like, am I going to do this forever? And you
Right.
can, and you outline as well of not only going through the conversation, having the conversation, but also setting a time, not a time limit of like it all changes, but a time limit on like, when do we reevaluate like what's needed? Like when you go
Right.
back to work after a certain amount of time, when do I have to, when can I give up all the chores, those
Yeah,
kind of things, so
exactly.
that you're in continual conversation around it.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and the key really is in this book, it's coming up with your own solutions that are going to work for your family.
Yes.
So I was really intentional in writing it to not stick in my opinions as much as possible around what worked for my family necessarily,
Right.
because it will be totally different for someone else's family.
Mm-hmm.
And so really having those conversations and figuring out what's going to work for us here in this
Right.
system with the parameters that we have, I think is a really key point in why you want to have those conversations as a family.
Right. I mean, because you talk about like, well, it's not roles, but as far as like your philosophies on like healthcare and like what does that mean, and education, even looking forward down the line as far as like discipline. I mean, we're not doing discipline stuff, but again, I bring those things up because you're not saying like, this is how you should do healthcare and this is how a baby should, or a kiddo is going to be disciplined. It's just, again, there's 55 of them, like things to talk about that then at least prompt it. Because fast forwarding in a parenthood, like the discipline part of like, what is it okay to do and what is it not okay to do, oftentimes isn't discussed really, because like, oh, we're not going to deal with that forever. And then all of a sudden, like your own dad and your own parenting like comes up in you, your own mom, and you knee jerk into it. And like, oh, I didn't realize I was going to do that. And
Exactly.
that I found, at least with the dads I'm working with, like can be a big challenge. Is that something you see in your practice as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So people often come in on different pages around discipline, and usually it's about how they grew up, and either they have an intention of raising their children the way that they grew up, or they want to do the complete opposite.
Yeah.
And a lot of what that boils down to, in my opinion, is understanding your history. So really getting to know yourself, if you haven't taken time to do that. Like, why do I do the things that I do? Why do I say the things that I say? Where does that come from? And does that really reflect who I am today and who I want to be? So if you haven't kind of delved into your own past, especially around things like parenting, the way that you were parented and the way that you were disciplined, it's a good time to do that prior to having a baby so that you don't kind of tumble into, say, the terrible twos, and feel like you have no idea what you're doing. And like you said, have the knee-jerk reaction. So you really are thoughtful around it, because your child is always going to reflect exactly what's happening. They're the perfect mirror to the experience, right? So if you're getting escalated and frustrated with your 2-year-old for throwing a tantrum or doing something like that, it's only going to heighten the experience, right? And so you need to have tools at your disposal to figure out how you want to navigate that with some skill, right? Because it's hard in the moment. And a lot of people kind of drop off at that point. They're like, just go to your room, and they explode with something, and maybe they haven't thought through how they actually want to do that. Maybe they don't want to say that.
Right.
So,
right.
Yeah. Really.
And you're so right about that. Like if unconsciously you're going into parenting, you either like parent the way you were parented, or you just do the opposite because you didn't like the way that we were parented. Maybe not the whole thing, but in like certain aspects. Right. And so instead of actively choosing and like simmering down on like, I'm going to take this piece and change this piece, in those heightened moments when you're frustrated and you just want to be done, then you want to have something thought out. And it's kind of going back to like with congruency with the couples, like, is to have that, I don't want to say united front because it's kind of like an us against them dynamic, but like for the parent to be congruent. So later on down the line, kiddos aren't figuring like, well, like mom let me get away with this, but dad won't let me do this, and vice versa. And then that puts the child in an awkward situation because they're trying to figure things out too much.
Right. It can also put them in a very powerful situation, right? So if they figure out how to triangulate their parents, like I know I can go to dad for this and I have to go to mom for this, then like you said, it splits up the couple. So when you're talking about a united front, that is the foundation, right? So we need to be on the same page about how we're going to approach this, so that our child doesn't come to one of us thinking, well, dad's a lot more relaxed, he'll let me do whatever, because they figure that out quickly. And it can give a child a lot of power, which is not a comfortable position. Like you said, they won't feel comfortable, they won't feel safe with that.
Right. Because that obviously like erodes at the couple's relationship, because it's perceived then of, well, she's undermining what I said, and she's feeling that he's cutting the legs out from underneath you. And then, so not only is the child in an uncomfortable situation, but then mom and dad are at odds as well.
Exactly. Yeah. It'll be an uncomfortable family situation quickly.
Yes, totally. And then as far as kind of family dynamics and things like that, like what are those aspects, whether it's like circle of friends and social and letting other people, I mean, we were talking about discipline, letting other people discipline. Is that okay? Is that not okay? Like how do you best navigate that part?
Well, that can be tricky. And I didn't talk much about that in this book, but where it can really come into play is often extended family, right? And so, you might have the experience where your own parents disagree with what you're doing and maybe are very vocal about how they disagree about what you're doing. And you should just X instead, right? And so I always encourage parents or expectant parents to have a plan around that as well. So really talk through, like, how do we want to handle our extended family and our friends, our family, in terms of disciplining our child, or in terms of, feeding our child junk food or whatever it is, right? To just have a plan of like, we're going into this together and we're going to request these things of our own parents or of our friends who are watching our child or while we're at work, whatever it is. So to have those conversations as well, because that can get a little tricky.
Yeah, grandparents never give sweets to the grandkids. Are you kidding? Like that only happens once or twice, right?
Exactly.
Very few and far between. Yeah, and then as far as kind of coming back together as a couple, I think that is something I'd like to hear your advice for our listeners around about. Once you become parents, babies here, not even like if it's second and third babies coming in, like so much focus goes into the baby, the kiddo, the family, that so many times it's a long time before the couples realize that they're not a couple anymore. They're just moms and dads to this little awesome, beautiful thing. But their relationship has really suffered. Like what advice do you give to them about that aspect?
Yeah, so I am such a strong proponent of if you are having a baby as a couple, and I know some people do it on their own, bless them for having the fortitude to do that. But if you're going into parenthood as a couple, you have to put your relationship as the foundation, right? So yes, your child's needs are going to take precedence a lot of the time, but if you can take time to also schedule in you know, now it's a little tricky with COVID, but like a date night at home, right? Or, you know, just making time to find connection time. It's so critical. And I also tell parents that you don't really see the light until your child's about 3, right?
Okay.
So
it's listen to that, people. Listen.
It really is like, you know, kind of head down, you're in it, you're just, and every time you learn something, everything changes a few months later, right? So you just have your system down and you're feeling comfortable, and the new teeth start coming in, or your child starts preschool, or whatever it is, right? And so to just be super flexible around that, but to understand that at around age 3, things start to look different. You know, your child becomes sort of more of their own person and their personality. They're able to do more things on their own. And a lot of times that's when people start finding each other again, if they've kind of lost each other in the parenthood journey. But if you can keep at least a thread of that going through the first 3 years, especially if you're planning to have kids in succession, it's really super helpful in terms of keeping your foundation steady, because it is true. People, you know, they wake up and all of a sudden they're lying next to someone who seems like a total stranger because they just haven't had time to connect.
Right. Yeah. And I can attest to that, as well as the 3-year mark of the cycles that you go through. Like at first it's just like getting through the day. Sometimes, you know, it's day to day and maybe week to week with like this baby changing and different milestones, and what worked last week didn't work this week, but then they get longer and longer, and you can look up and you can kind of put things in a different perspective. And a lot of times that's when couples are finally doing this kind of work, right? And it's 3 years to get to a point of, oh, we should have talked about this before, but now we finally have some bandwidth to be able to sit down and work these things out, hopefully, and it can be resolved. But, you know, and this is the purpose of your book, is to like not have it be getting through 3 years in order to get back to the life that like brought this baby into the world, right? To be able to do it all the way throughout and have it evolve and have it be a team. You be a team throughout it.
Right. And it really just builds such a more solid foundation for that couple and that family when you're able to do that. So finding those times when you can look up, when maybe you've actually had a good night's sleep and, you know, things are going pretty smoothly, to actually make some time to connect and reflect on the experience together, so that, you know, things keep moving forward in a positive, growing direction, rather than, you know, shutting down and stuffing things and like, well, forget it, there's too much going on, we're not going to talk about it. To just keep doing it, because that's what builds that strong foundation.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, as we're wrapping up now, like and at the time of this recording, the book's not quite out yet, but I want you to tell people where you can where they can get on a list for the announcements, and then when it does come out, where to find that. I have on your website, but where would they be able to find that?
Sure. So if you go to my website, which is drduegertherapy.com, there is a tab that says books, and you open that, and then you can get on an email list and you can find out how to pre-order. I'll also be on Amazon in hopefully about 3 weeks. So you could go directly to Amazon and look it up as well. So yeah, if you could go that route, that would be great.
Right. And I'll make sure those links are in the show notes for you listening, so you can just click on to that. Again, it's, you know, this book I saw a year ago. I've been a really big fan of it. I'm really proud of the work that you've done, and I'm excited for more people to get it, because it has, just in the groups of dads that I've suggested it to and who have been able to like take advantage of it, like it's made a big difference for them. And that's why I was so eager to bring you on now that the book is going to be more readily available. So thank you so much, Stephanie. I appreciate you being here.
Thank you, Jay. I appreciate you having me.
And don't forget, I have 2 free offers for both moms and dads. First, for the moms, I have my 40 ways of connecting with your baby during pregnancy that you can get on my website at drjwarren.com/40 ways. That's 40 ways. And for the dads, I have the 9 myths about becoming a dad that is also available on my site at drjwarren.com/9 myths. That's the number 9 myths. So both moms and dads are covered. Go check them out. I hope you enjoy them.